Hey everyone at home, this is Miss Suozzo from Windsor Forest Elementary, and I'm here to demonstrate how to do a floating chalk print. Floating chalk prints can come out in a variety of ways, but they are very vibrant and pleasing to the eye. As you can see, you're going to get a range of results based on the colors you use and the techniques that you provide during this process. So, to get started, let's first figure out what we need. And before we can get started, we also need to know how to behave as artists. So even though we're no longer in the art room, artist behavior extends beyond the classroom. So remember that we're working on creating an original work of art. We're developing new skills, so we need to be patient with ourselves. We want to make sure that our workspace stays organized. We want to make sure we're respecting our materials and that we are cleaning up efficiently when the project is complete. To get started, there are a few things you need. Sidewalk chalk is appropriate, or if you have chalk pastels at home, those are also adequate for this project. You'll need a spoon, a shallow pan or basin, paper. You can use any size and any type. You'll also need scissors if you want to cut your piece at the end. Painter's tape is an option. Newspaper is an option if you need some place to put your print when it's still wet. And lastly, a pencil if you'd like to sign your print when it is complete. This project is appropriate for ages K through 3, although anyone is more than happy to try it. We're working with standards where we're looking at how we're applying media, techniques, and processes in a two-dimensional work of art. In this process, we're dealing with printmaking techniques, specifically monoprinting. When you hear the word mono, does anything come to mind? Mono means one, so you're going to get one print for each time you go through this process. Now, before we can begin, I need to make sure that my studio is set up. You can do this project inside or out. To get started, I need to take my basin and fill it with water. You're looking at about 3 cups. You don't need to fill the basin all the way to the top, but it does need to have an ample amount of water. You're looking for about 1 to 1.5 inches in the pan. From here, I need to decide what color palette I'd like to use. When an artist is picking their color palette, it's the range of colors they're choosing for their artwork. From here, I'm going to look at the colors I have and decide what palette I would like to make. Try and think of 3 to 4 colors you think would work well together. You're going to take your chalk and your spoon, and you're going to slowly shave the chalk so that it turns into a powder, and we're going to see that that powder doesn't sink to the bottom, but it floats. In the back of your mind, I want you to think to yourself, why does the chalk float? And you're going to work your way around the basin. You don't want to just do one scrape with the chalk, because that's not going to be enough color. You want to build on top of each stroke so that the chalk is accumulating on top of itself, and that will make it more saturated or vibrant. Once you feel like you have a sufficient amount of chalk of the color, you can return it to your box. Remember, we keep a clean studio workspace, and then you'll go in for your next color. Once again, you want to make sure that you are building up that color, letting the chalk stack on itself before you move on to another portion in the basin. And once you feel like you have enough, return it to the box. Okay. And I'm just going to keep picking different colors. Remember, Ms. Suozzo said about 3 to 4, so I'm going to add in my blue, and then I think I'm going to go in for one more color. orange would create a really nice contrast against my blue because they're complementary colors. So, once you have your 3 to 4 colors, and you can always do more or less, you're going to sit and think, why is this chalk floating? So if you guys are familiar with pollen, which I'm sure you all are, you'll notice that sometimes in water, lakes, you'll see that it accumulates on top. And sometimes it almost looks so solid that you could walk on it. This is because pollen is buoyant, which means it has enough air in it that it is allowed to rest on top of the water, giving it a floating quality. Our chalk is the same. So from here, you're going to take your paper, and I mentioned at the beginning you can also use painter's tape. This is an option based on how you want your finished print to be presented. So you can either keep your paper nice and plain, or you can create a border using the painter's tape. This means that when you're finished with your print, you can pull the tape away and you'll have a nice border around your print. These are artistic decisions that you can make at home. I'm going to go with my bordered paper, but before I dip it into the water, you have an option. I can either leave my basin how it is, or I can create some subtle swirls. So I'm going to take the end of my spoon and I'm just going to slowly swirl the chalk to get some really nice aesthetic effects going on. I don't want to agitate the water too much because I might have that chalk go down to the bottom. So just gently, because I want the chalk to stay on the surface. Once I feel it's adequate, I'll take my paper and I'm just going to drop it into the water. I also want my paper to float on the surface. We are not submerging the paper. From here, I do something called tap dancing. I'm going to take my fingers and I'm just going to tap on the back of my paper to make sure that it's making perfect contact, because if it doesn't, I might have an effect like this, where I have a successful chalk print, but the area that is left white was where my paper did not make contact with the chalk. So tap dancing allows us to make ample coverage. Once I feel it's sufficient, I'm going to pull my print. So I'm going to pick a corner and pull it out and then display the success of the print. Wow, as you can see, the chalk that was floating on the surface of the water has now transferred to my paper. And this is where we have the option of newspaper to put our print to the side to allow it to dry. Now, I do suggest that you make more than one because you want to experiment with different colors. So I'm going to just agitate my water to the point that all my chalk goes to the bottom so that I have a nice clean canvas. And I'm going to do one more print, but this time I'm going to use my paper without the border so you can compare the two aesthetically. From here, I'm going to once again go through the steps. I'll take my chalk. Using my spoon, I'm going to scrape the side of my chalk. And once again, you can use chalk pastels if you have those at home. And remember, you want to build up the color. So a couple of scrapes. It's not one and done. And you want to make sure that you're giving your chance the opportunity to experiment with different colors. Making sure we're returning our chalk so that our work environment stays orderly. Maybe you want to pick soft, more neutral colors compared to more vibrant colors that are more neon-esque, and see how those transition to your finished print. So I'm going to go for one more color, and I'm thinking maybe a nice green. Okay, from here, who remembers the next step? If you're thinking in the back of your mind, subtle swirls, you are paying really good attention. So I'm going to take my spoon and make some subtle swirls. Remember, we're not agitating the water to the point that the chalk settles. We just want to get some really cool designs floating on top. From here, I'm going to take my paper and we're just going to drop it so that it is also floating on top. From here, we're going to utilize our fingers for some tap dancing techniques. And we're going to tap the paper with very gentle force to ensure that the paper is making contact with the chalk underneath. Once you feel like it's ready, you're going to pull your print, pick a corner, and pull. From here, we can already see some subtle differences with our first print. And I'm going to put this to the side to dry. While our prints are drying, I want you to start thinking at home, where have you maybe seen or heard of a process similar to this? Look at the picture in front of you. Is it paper? Think to yourself. The picture in front of you is actually a piece of fabric. You can use similar techniques when you're marbling fabrics or other papers. When it comes to marbling fabrics, you're not using chalk, however, because chalk's going to wash out of your clothes. When it comes to marbling fabrics, you're going to be using inks or paints, but you have to think to yourself, are those buoyant enough to float on the water? You might have to experiment at home, but most places they're going to put a gel-like substance in before their paints to provide a substance that the paint can then float on top of. Now, our prints are finished, so you have a couple of options. What's next, you may be thinking? While they're drying, think to yourself, am I satisfied with this? Is it finished? When an artist is finished with their work of art, they choose to add a signature. So you can sign your print if you choose, and when you're signing prints, there is a different means of signature because you want to indicate how many prints you pulled. And this was a mono print. So how many prints do you think that we pulled? If your answer was 1, you're correct. So you would be doing 1 print, 1 edition. You put your title, your name, and you can also include the year. If you want to take your print further, you can also cut it up and turn it into a collage, or you can manipulate your paper and turn it into something completely different, like a paper weaving. These are some artistic choices that you can pursue while at home. Now, while our prints are drying, you are in charge of cleaning up your studio space. Luckily, the materials we used did not lead to a big mess. So just making sure your chalk is returned, you empty out your water, and you clean your materials will be ample. Just make sure you take them back to their original place. All right, artists, now that our workstation is now cleaned and our studio returned to normal, I want to show you the results of our floating chalk print. The first is going to be the print we created utilizing painter's tape for a border, and the second was when we just decided to go in with our paper as is, both of which are both very impressive. If you chose to add a border with painter's tape, I'm going to demonstrate how to remove the tape now. You should have put the back pieces tucked aside, and you're just going to want to peel slowly while your print is still slightly damp. You don't want the adhesive in the tape to dry. It'll make it harder to pull up and it might rip your paper. So while your print is still slightly damp, you're going to remove the painter's tape. And you should get a nice crisp line. And I'm just going to work my way around. Doing small bits at a time because I don't want to do a grand pull in case there's a snag that might rip my paper. So I'm doing it in small increments, holding down my paper as I go to provide a little bit of resistance. From here, my tape is underneath my next row, so I'm going to rip it and take a break and peel up the next row before I can finish that one. So once that one's released, I can pull that one aside. Once again, very slowly moving our tape. One last go. Oh, my paper's ripping a little bit there, so I might come out the other end. So a slight rip in the paper. It might have dried a little bit out too much there, but I'm not going to let it hinder me from moving forward. So now you can see that the painter's tape allows my piece to look more complete. When an artwork is matted or framed, it gives the illusion of completion. And from here, you have the option of signing your work. If you reference the slide, you'll see that there's 3 bits of information that go on the bottom of a print. From here, I need to decide, do I enjoy my print vertically or horizontally? So I'm going to take a moment to inspect my artwork and make that decision. Try taking a look at your artwork from all sides. This is non-objective, so there really isn't a top or a bottom unless you decide what that is. So I need to take a time to myself and figure out the orientation of my print. I'm thinking I like this the most, where this is the top of my piece and this is the bottom. So when it comes to signing, you can use a pen or pencil. In the bottom left, you're going to put a ratio. How many prints out of how many productions? And if you recall, this was a monoprint. So we only did 1 print, which means I'm going to label this 1 pull out of 1 print, because there's going to be nothing else like this. So there's no way I can go back to the original and replicate it. From here, I need to think of a title. Do you have to title your artwork? No, I could simply just put untitled. But I think I'm going to title this Cotton Candy, because the colors I used are very vivid and candy-like. So from here I have my title. Lastly, I need to sign it. I can do my full name, or I can condense it to maybe just my first initial and last name. And if you would like, you can also add a date. I'm just going to put 2020. So from here, you now have a completed print utilizing a formatting of how many editions, title, and your name and year. If you did not choose to use painter's tape, you can still sign your work to imply it's completed. You can always sign in the bottom or sign on the back. If you're super proud of it, get it matted. Add an additional layer in the background to really frame your print. Alright guys, that's all I have for you today. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed creating your own floating chalk print at home.